First and foremost, let me apologize for not being able to be physically with you. I have to say that I have been looking forward to this conference for a very long time, so I really do apologize. But at least the software that I use gives me the possibility for recording the presentation, so it's something. So the info domain covers a whole lot of territory: cyber, IW, fake news, trolling, etc. But I'm a big proponent of the idea that people should pretty much stay within their lane. Um, so I took this invitation as a challenge to consider deterrence as a framework for solutions in the area we're working on at Chapel Hill, which is terrorist use of social media to spread propaganda, and specifically the visual propaganda in the online space. So to do that, we need to take a step back and think through deterrence itself. Now, we are all, of course, prisoners of our own disciplinary perspectives. So for me, as a communication person, deterrence is a communicative relationship. And in specific, it's the relationship that's left when neither side is able to trust normal channels of communication, when normal methods of communication fail. For those of you who may be of a particular age, you may remember that there was a moment when a set of articles that were purportedly written by the Soviet version of the Chief of Naval Operations leaked, or they were at least published in the clear. And there was this huge controversy because before you could even think about what the articles meant in terms of Soviet naval thinking, first came the problem of whether they were gaslighting us. So, were they really by Admiral Gorshkov? If they were they for his people? In other words, were they authentically representing Soviet naval thought? Or were they written in the knowledge that we would read them, and so they were an attempt to throw us off the track, so to speak? Or were they written in the knowledge that we would think that they were throwing us off the track, and so they were knowing that we were thinking that they were knowing? You get where I'm going with this. When that's the way words work, when that's what's left of the relationship in terms of words, then the only thing that's available is the use of military hardware to try and signal what messages that there are. That's what deterrence is. So if that's what deterrence is, then what are the parameters for that kind of a relationship? Well, it's not for friends. I mean, for example, it would make no sense to discuss the US and Canada attempting to deter one another. I mean, we have a joint operational command, for God's sake. So it doesn't work in that kind of a context. It has to mean that we believe that our partners are rational. Excuse me. Not necessarily that we believe that their goals are rational. So there were a lot of people, for example, who believed that the Soviet leadership never meant what they were talking about in terms of the ultimate goal was global hegemony, because paradise would be when it was global socialism. There were plenty of people who thought that that was just meant for internal consumption because it was the way that they were going to keep the Soviet workers happy, that it was always nonsense. But there were other people who thought that the Soviet leaders really did believe that, but that it didn't matter because they were rational thinkers in terms of their understanding of what the global situation was, right? So they understood the nature of risk. They understood that stalemate was the best they were going to get in terms of outcome. So better red than dead, if you want to put it that way. We also have to have confidence in our C3 systems. And I used to be a total nuclear C3 nerd, but if you want to put it in terms of the nuclear system, our systems have to be tight enough so that no individual nut job can take it on their own hook to launch a nuclear weapon. But they also have to be loose enough so that if the command is given, then people will go ahead and do what it is that they're ordered to do. So there have to be both fail-safes and fail-positives. Additionally, it will only work if there's overwhelming superiority on the part of one side or rough parity. But if you're on the way to one of those states, that's when you really have a destabilizing situation. The problem is, when you talk about today's context, who is our potential partner in the online space? That is a real problem. It ain't going to be the people who post the material, right? At least on the jihadist side of the house, that's not likely to work. It's hard to deter people who are literally fanboys of the angel of death, right? It's hard to convince them because there's nothing that they value more than the cause and more than their ability to martyr themselves for the cause, right? Stop or I'll shoot does not work when the answer you get is, oh, bring it, baby. So what about the platforms? What about the tech companies? Well, they're certainly not our friends. I don't care how many times Mark Zuckerberg, bats his eyelashes and says, oh, Facebook is a company that's all about idealism, right? My old man would have said in response to that, if you believe that, then there's a bridge in Brooklyn for you. But what do we do to them, right? What do we threaten them with? Threats have to be credible in a deterrent system, and so far at least they've managed to do just enough to get themselves good enough PR to keep us from doing anything that's really going to pull them back. The best bet, I think, is to pressure the countries where the material is being produced and uploaded in non-virtual space. Now, in some instances, those spaces are in members of the coalition, and they just need the information. In others, those countries need to be pressured to act. So before anything else, we need to be clear, the collapse of the caliphate in physical space is not ending this problem. They are still pushing out very high-end materials. So, for example, this is from the Islamic State very recently.
كل من يدعوه يلقاه قريبا يسمع الهمس بذرات الرمال يا إله الكون جئناك حفاة وعراة فاكسنا ثوب المعالي كل من يدعوه يلقاه قريبا يسمع الهمس بذرات الرمال يا إله الكون جئناك حفاة وعراة فاكسنا ثوب المعالي وعراة فاكسنا ثوب المعالي ربك الحامي فسله خالصا تلقاه ينجيك في سود الليالي كل ما فوق البرايا زائل ثم يبقى وجه ربي ذو الجلال ربك الحامي فسله خالصا تلقاه ينجيك في سود الليالي كل ما فوق البرايا زائل ثم يبقى وجه.
Look, let's not put too fine a point on it. That's a digital tourism brochure. And on their best day, the North Carolina State Bureau of Tourism could not compete with that. Although the gentleman that I work with always points out that Florida and California probably could. There's a 20-minute video that's narrates the story of a martyr's life and how his sons are going to follow in his legacy. Look at this quick clip of one of the sons praying at his grave.
Allohim, meni onamni va ukalarimni haqqa ergashganlarini otam bilan jannatlarda birga qilgin. Robbim, sen duolarning ijobat qiluvchi bo'lgan.
The focus on his hands, everything about that is incredibly high end. The other problem is that IS visual aesthetics are clearly impacting downstream groups. So this is from HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham.
في الشهر الخامس من عام 2013.
Listen, trust me when I tell you, 5 months ago they would not have been capable of pulling off that shot. Now, it's easiest to see with HTS just because they're the closest in quality, so you can literally line up the shots. So what we've done here is just put HTS and IS side by side.
في ذات الوقت الذي كان المجاهدون يتصدون فيه لحملات الجيش المصري وحلفائه، كانت هناك معركة أخرى مع خوارج العصر.
Now I could only line up 2 at a time, but although the execution is weaker, and here again HTS
الهيئة لا تدافع عن هذه المنطقة، هؤلاء كذبة يريدون أن يشككوا بالمسلمين، فعليكم أن تعرفوهم جيدا وتحذروا منهم.
And you're thinking to yourself, that is not what it looks like when I shoot. Because if you think about how you would have to hold the weapon to have the gun stick out that way, it would be at an incredibly awkward angle. And the reason that that is not a familiar visual to you is because you're not the target demographic. It isn't supposed to mimic your experiences. It is designed to very precisely mimic the way video games look, right? For gamers, that immediately pulls them in because it looks exactly the way it looks when you're shooting while playing a game. So we're seeing memes, images, visual dog whistles, if you will, not to any ethnic group or nationality, but to what we refer to as a globalized youth demographic. And that is not by accident. Call of Duty alone, which we're seeing references to throughout these videos, our research interns have done this side by side that is just stunning. But Call of Duty alone, the number of kids who play that game, if it was a country, would be the 12th largest country in the world. That's how many kids are playing that. And we've realized we just can't evaluate these videos anymore without a 20-year-old sitting around for precisely this reason. Great. What does any of this have to do with deterrence, you asked? So here's the thing. We've developed an analytical tool for the evaluation of these videos at Chapel Hill. And it's just a simple grid, x-axis, y-axis. So now I realize you can't read this, but first, I did this for 2 reasons. First, I realized that a number of you have an Army background, or I should say U.S. Army, given the Carlisle was co-sponsoring this conference. And I figured if I didn't have at least one slide that you couldn't read, that you wouldn't actually respect the presentation. Second, I just want to give you a sense. So all we've done here is list every aspect of production components of the video that can be given a rating in terms of quality. So if you can measure it, if you can rank it, if you can score it, we just listed it down in a long line. Then here are the gradations that we can give it. So everything from, we put an iPhone into Grandpa's hand and asked him to shoot a video, all the way up to Hollywood. That's all the grid looks like. Now, when we ran our initial data set, we discovered that this kind of evaluation of video quality can in fact provide a kind of digital bomb damage assessment. So what we saw with the initial data set was videos broke out as follows, and we just did Islamic State initially. Now this is completely non-controversial. This is what people meant when they said ISIS, Islamic State, is, quote, a generation ahead of other terrorist groups. This is also non-controversial. So everybody who followed video of Islamic State noted the decentralization around the time that the coalition bombing campaign got really serious. But because we were only the only team that was tracking quality, we were the only team that noted that the quality cratered when they decentralized. Now, we thought at the time, good news, right? If you care about propaganda, if that's what you're assessing, and you see that the result of a kinetic campaign is the cratering of their quality, that is one outcome that you would want. The problem is, we then saw this. And what we realized after talking it through is that when you force the core team to decentralize, to go out to the boonies, they're now working with brand new video makers, with kids. They have no choice now but to begin to train their new team members. So essentially what we did was force them to replicate their production centers couple of dozen times? And quality gradually began to come up because that's what happens when you begin to teach people how to do media. They get better and better in fits and starts. So to give you a sense of what this looks like, this is an example of a video that was produced right at the end of ISIS. It dropped within a couple of days of the declaration of the caliphate. And so here's what a filled out grid looks like from that period of time. This is what a video looked like as the quality cratered. And you see that the filled out cells are pushed all the way towards the other side. This is a video as they began to recover. You see the cells are now pushing out in the other direction. And by the way, this video is nowhere near the quality of the ones that I showed you as we went through. Okay, so what does that have to do with deterrence? The one party that would be deterrable now that the production teams, like the foreign fighters, have begun to scatter. And by the way, we can't figure out why nobody else seems to be freaked out by the fact that the media teams, like the foreign fighters, have begun to scatter, are the countries from whence the material is being produced and posted. Now, certainly, some of these localities don't need the push of deterrent threat to deal with this problem, right? If we call Jordan or France and tell them where a production facility is, they're going to take care of it just because they're going to take care of it. But other countries might be more ambivalent or even more welcoming. So, for example, Pakistan. If Pakistan knows that there's a production facility operating in their area, it's possible that they might need a deterrent threat to push out and take care of it. But the key to developing a response is knowing where the materials are coming from, and we don't know that now. We believe that given a large enough data set, we are going to be able to begin to fingerprint those facilities. So think of it this way. If you are a huge movie fan, if someone calls you and says, "Good news, we've just discovered in a warehouse an undiscovered classic. It was just sitting around in bins. Nobody knew it was there. And we're going to call in a bunch of film experts to watch this thing and decide who the original director was." If you watch an undiscovered, quote, undiscovered classic, you're going to be able to tell immediately if it was a Hitchcock film, just as you'd be able to tell immediately if you were watching a Spielberg movie. Well, just so, we think if we are able to go through enough of these things, we're going to begin to establish who the producers are. We're already being able to start these folders, so we're calling them, Bob and Ed and Dave, because we don't know the actual names of these things. Now, we can't do the location piece on our own. We need to cooperate with people who are in the intelligence community, but we can give them the initial piece of that, which they don't have on their own. So we get these fingerprints, we can give that information to people who know stuff about the location, and we can start figuring out where these media centers are. And that then permits the deterrent of the countries where these things are located. And that, we believe, is how you can create a deterrent relationship with the locations where these things are being produced.